Hey everyone, welcome back to YouTube, another episode. And here I want to talk about something that has really plagued men in society. Trust me, this was one of the ones that I had a hard time overcoming as well, is the ego. And a lot of people want to say, well, you got to kill the ego. A lot of people want to say, even I've heard in the spiritual world a lot about ego death. And I get that. I get what people mean by it, and I've seen it in people. But I don't believe that it's permanently gone. I think that ego's still there, and that's for a different conversation, neither here nor there. But I think that becomes a kind of a term that's a hashtag for if you've done plant medicine or the spiritual world. They're very prideful in saying that statement, like they're part of a fucking club. But I think there's a lot of difference there than what people are really alluding to. Not the episode today. We'll dive into that another time. But today, what I'm talking about is the ego that is inherently within all of us. Now, all of us men, especially all of us men, we have a deep-rooted connection with that ego. And that ego prevents us in a lot of ways from moving forward in our lives. Now, whether that is with people in relationships, whether that's with friendships, whether that's with healthy competition, the ego can create a lot of problems for us. And when I say healthy competition, like healthy competition with ourselves, right? The ego can create a lot of anxiety. It can create a lot of stress, and it can really inhibit us from actually moving forward in our lives. And what we first have to understand about mastering the ego, because I'm a firm believer in mastering the ego. I don't think that the ego needs to dissolve. That's never been what I've desired to do in my life, and that's never what I've pushed anybody to do that I've coached. I believe that the ego has a very great purpose for us, or else it wouldn't be here. Psychologically, it wouldn't be a part of us. But whatever we're connected to that creates this term of what we call ego is obviously a vital part of our existence, of how we've evolved as human beings. So I believe firmly that the ego has a place in our lives, and I think that it's got a great place in our lives. But that being said, we have to understand that the ego plays both roles. It can play the one taking advantage, or it can play the one that we're taking advantage of consciously. And I think that's the biggest key, right? Is to have awareness and know when your ego is taking advantage of you, or when you are taking advantage of the ego and leveraging it in order to benefit the goals and outcomes that you desire, right? That traditionally we hope are not harming other people. But the ego has a place. And in that ego ends up stifling us quite often if we don't have control of it. And this is where I think majority of men reside, is they have no real understanding of the awareness of the ego and how to utilize it in a way that benefits the outcomes and desires that they have, that promotes not only them, but the people that they're interacting with. The ego has a place for these things, right? And so we really need to start to come to the realization that if we can learn to harness the ego, if we can learn to bring it into part of our awareness and part of our toolbox, we can actually leverage it all the time in a way that is healthy and beneficial. But if we continue to be unaware about the ego, if we continue to allow the ego to dictate our outcomes unconsciously, then we are going to constantly be in a place in which the ego betrays us, and in which we actually are not living out our best lives. This can take form in a lot of different ways, guys. But we have to first understand the way that it is interacting with us right now. So the first thing is to assess your ego and how it's interacting with you in your life. Is it blocking you? Are you saying shit you don't mean all the time? Are you getting offended very easily? Are you being put in situations in which your conversations with your spouse or your kids, you end up feeling like you're attacked? Because if you're feeling you're attacked, a lot of times that's the ego rising up to essentially block an insecurity or trauma that we have. So we have to understand that as well. And when that ego stands up, that's the next piece to this, is if you have the ability, which every single one of you pretty much does for the most part, is that if you can sit down at the end of the day and write out maybe some of your interactions that you've gone through that day, and say, where did my ego come in? How did it serve me or not serve me in this scenario? And if it didn't serve me, what could I have done differently? Or what do I want to challenge myself with if this is to come up again? These are all healthy questions to get into, to ask ourselves so that we can contemplate where we have to first categorically match where our ego is coming into our lives so that we can tap into that category of conversation or situation and be aware of how it steps foot in there. Be aware of when it's coming up. And once we are able to do that, we can then assess, okay, did it serve me or did it not serve me? If it served me, then it's saying, okay, cool, I'd like to reinforce that part of my ego. I feel like I was aware the ego was there and I was using it to the advantage in which the outcome was benefiting me and the other people that I was in the conversation with. And then it's also saying, hey, the ego came up here. Yeah, that didn't really benefit me. I kind of looked like an asshole. And maybe now I need to assess my approach. So you get two things here when you do this. You get to assess when you find the negative aspect of the ego jumping out. You get to assess the approach that you took, and you get to assess the insecurity it was protecting. Okay? And those are valuable points here. These are great points of reference for you to come back to. Now, when you assess this and you understand, okay, I know when this is coming up. Now I see the aspects in which it's coming into my life. I see the situations in which it's coming into my life. How do I take that and then change that to be not so detrimental to who I am, or make me look like an asshole, or make me just not be authentic in the way that I'm presenting myself because I'm so busy about guarding who I am or what I'm doing that I'm not even being aware of what I'm saying or how it's coming across, right? And so a lot of people see this. I mean, obviously, alcohol is a big, it is a big catalyst to people acting a fool and doing things that are more egocentric as opposed to being aware of the ego, because of the fact that you're losing the ability to have a conscious state and conscious evaluation of your presence, of your words, of your thoughts, all of that. So obviously alcohol is a big place for this. This is why people end up leaving a lot of things, if they can remember, evenings or conversations where they feel very inauthentic and they feel embarrassed or ashamed. It's because of the fact that they weren't able to check themselves or to question that ego. So ultimately, it's understanding that that is one of the biggest pieces to this, is being aware and being able to give yourself points of reference. When we're able to do this, then and only then can we truly understand where and why this ego is coming out. And when we start to assess why it's coming out, we can really assess, okay, I got some trauma. I got some wounds. I got something that is an insecurity in me that my ego constantly is trying to step up and protect. And I don't know that I really need that, and it's not serving me. And when you start to do this work, and we're going to go back here for a second to being elite, when you start to do this work, this is where you can up level to being an elite man. When you start to actually work on the constant assessment of who you are and what you're doing and the way you're coming across, you are doing the constant work that is incredibly fucking hard. I have told men this repeatedly. I find it harder to work on myself internally than I did to be an elite member of the US military. I truly do. And that is a lot for me to say because it was not fucking easy where I was. It was a very difficult environment to be as good as we were. And I take a lot of pride in that, but I also got the shit kicked out of me for a lot of time while I was in battalion, just like almost every other Ranger did. But it is still harder for me to show up every day and constantly work on my psyche, work on my perception, work on how I present myself, work on the words that I'm sharing, work on how I am interacting with my wife. Like these are all things. And I'll throw this out there is that if you are in a partnership right now, you are have the added experience of having somebody else challenge that ego constantly, and you have the experience or the added experience of being able to question those insecurities on a regular basis because they're constantly coming up, or the trauma is constantly coming up. So you get the ability to assess this, but at the end of the day, you can't just rely on other people. You have to be willing to put in the work. So back to really understanding the ego. Now the ego can actually benefit you in a lot of ways. One way is the fact that you were so good the day before, so how do you get better the next day? What did you do the day before that was really good, but you want to increase that because you found your threshold? Or the ego of saying, I did find my threshold. How do I leverage my ego to challenge that, to do more and raise the bar? That is a healthy place for your ego to reside, to constantly be pushing you in a way that you're looking to serve and be better for the community that you're around, for the people who trust you and believe in you and follow you. Another way is that challenging yourself to deliver more, right? You get into a conversation where you have a capacity where you're bumping up against your top level ceiling, and you have no way to further the conversation. You feel intellectually inferior. Well, the ego says, instead of lashing out at that person, being like, wow, they're intellectually above me, and I felt a little embarrassed, saying that a healthy ego can be, hey man, I would love to be able to speak that way to that higher level. What do I need to start reading? What do I need to start interacting with in my life to where I get in that conversation again in, a month, 2 months, a year from now? And I'm at that higher vibration. I'm at that higher intellectual level to where I can actually have this conversation with them and not feel like a fool. That's where a healthy level of ego can come in. But we have to really be assessing this through the awareness of what the ego truly is. It is a beneficial tool and it's a detrimental tool. It's a double-edged sword, right? And we have to be careful which edge is coming at us, right? Is the edge that we're supposed to be swinging away, or is the edge coming back like this and we're pulling it too far back, giving ourselves a haircut, right? That's a question we have to ask. So ultimately, guys, the ego can be to our advantage if we allow it to be, but only when we are aware and conscious of how we are using it. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see y'all next week.